Welcome to the Sleepy Geographer channel, a quiet corner where the world unfolds slowly, fact by fact, ridge by ridge. Tonight, the story waiting for you is not about the crowded continents or the familiar landscapes we know so well. Instead, we will embark on a journey to the edges of the map, to the places where the blue of the ocean deepens into solitude, and the only sound is the wind and the waves. Our story is all about the world's most isolated islands, those lonely specks of rock and sand that stand as silent sentinels in the vast, blue wilderness of our planet. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you are listening from this evening. Perhaps you are in a bustling city, surrounded by the hum of life, seeking a moment of quiet. Or maybe you are in a small town where the horizons are a little closer, and the idea of true distance feels more tangible. If you find comfort in these journeys to faraway places, I'd be so grateful if you could gently tap the like button and subscribe. To those who are already subscribed, thank you kindly. You are the calm harbor from which this channel sets sail, and a small reassurance as we prepare to voyage into the realm of solitude. I hope this exploration brings a sense of peace, not restlessness. But if your mind does begin to wander across these great distances, at least it will be accompanied by the gentle thoughts of shores untouched and silence deeply kept. So, let us begin, not with a list of coordinates or a recitation of facts, but with a feeling. It is a feeling you may have experienced while gazing at a world map, your eyes drifting away from the familiar shapes of continents and into the great, expansive blue. There, in the midst of that immensity, you might have noticed a tiny, almost apologetic dot, a speck with a name written in a small, faint font. A place like Tristan da Cunha or Bouvet Island or Pitcairn. In that moment, a question might have stirred in your mind. A question that is less about geography and more about existence itself. What is it like there? This is the allure of the empty space on the map. It is a call from the void, an invitation to contemplate not just a place, but the very concept of isolation. In our modern, hyper-connected world, where a notification is never more than a moment away, and the glow of a screen illuminates our darkest nights, the idea of a place that exists beyond it all holds a powerful, almost mythical resonance. Isolation is different from simply being alone. Being alone is a temporary state, a quiet room, a walk in an empty forest with the knowledge that a town is just beyond the trees. True isolation of the kind we will explore is a fundamental condition of place. It is a landscape that exists, day after day, year after year, with the immense, patient indifference of the ocean that surrounds it. It is a place where the horizon is a perfect, unbroken circle, and the nearest human being outside your own small group might be farther away than the moon is from the earth. These islands are the hermits of the physical world. They did not choose their solitude. It was bestowed upon them by the slow, mighty forces of geology. They are the tips of submerged volcanoes, born in fiery eruptions on the seafloor and patiently built, layer by layer of lava, until they finally pierce the surface to meet the sky. Others are the stubborn remnants of ancient continents, fragments that were left behind when the great land masses drifted apart, like a page torn from a book and forgotten. However they were formed, they now stand as monuments to solitude, their very existence a testament to the fact that the earth still holds pockets of profound seclusion. To understand these places, we must first shift our sense of scale. We often think of distance in terms of a car journey or a flight. But the isolation of these islands operates on a different dimension. It is measured in the number of days spent on a ship riding the swells of the open ocean. It is measured in the sheer, daunting expense and logistical feats required to reach them. It is measured in the fact that for many, the only regular contact with the outside world is a visiting supply ship that comes just a few times a year, a fleeting thread connecting them to the bustling hum of humanity. This isolation is not merely a matter of physical distance. It seeps into the very soil and soul of a place. It dictates what can live there, the unique, often endemic species that have evolved in quiet laboratories, untouched by the competitive rush of continental ecosystems. It shapes the human spirit, the small communities that have learned to be self-reliant, to create their own culture, their own rhythms, their own unique relationship with the sea and the sky that envelops them. On an isolated island, every resource is precious, every arrival is an event, and the community is not just a society but a lifeboat. Yet for all their remoteness, these islands are not desolate. There is a profound difference between emptiness and loneliness. A bustling city square can feel lonelier than any windswept shore. These islands are full of life, just life on its own terms. The cacophony of a seabird colony crowding a cliff face. The slow, patient growth of vegetation that has adapted to the salt spray and the thin soil. The deep, enduring silence of a place where human noise has never truly taken root. As we prepare to visit these islands in our minds, one by one, we are not just going to observe them as curiosities. We are going to try and listen to what they have to say. They are reminders of a world that is wilder and quieter than our daily lives suggest. They are keepers of stories, of shipwrecks and castaways, of scientific discovery and personal transformation, of communities built on resilience and a deep, abiding connection to a single, solitary piece of land. So, let us fold up our modern maps with their dense networks of roads and cities. Let us instead look upon the great blue canvas of the ocean and turn our gaze towards those tiny, defiant dots. For in their immense isolation, they hold a mirror to our own need for quiet, for space, and for the timeless rhythm of nature undisturbed. They are the empty spaces on the map, waiting not to be filled but to be contemplated. The allure of a lonely island is a powerful one, a quiet call from a speck of land adrift in an immense blue ocean. It is a romantic notion, born from maps and daydreams. But to truly understand these places, we must gently shift our gaze from the heart to the chart. We must ask a more precise question. What, in the measured language of geography, actually makes a place the most isolated? How do we define the middle of nowhere? It is not as simple as pointing to the most distant island we can find. Isolation is a complex recipe, with several key ingredients measured not in miles alone, but in the sheer effort, time, and vulnerability required to bridge the distance. It is a layered concept, and to comprehend it, we must learn to read the ocean not as a blank space, but as a textured expanse of currents, distances, and profound emptiness. The most intuitive ingredient, of course, is sheer physical distance. Geographers and oceanographers use a specific tool to quantify this: the distance to the nearest significant landmass. This isn't always the nearest continent, as a closer island group can provide a stepping stone, a psychological and logistical bridge to the wider world. The true loneliest islands are those that are far from everything, continents, archipelagos, even other tiny uninhabited specks. To grasp this scale, let us consider a familiar distance. The English Channel, for instance, is about 34 kilometers or 21 miles at its narrowest point. For centuries, this has been a significant barrier and a defining boundary. Now, imagine a distance 100 times greater, a voyage of over 3,000 kilometers or nearly 2,000 miles across the open ocean. This is the scale of isolation we are discussing. At these distances, the ocean ceases to be a body of water and becomes an environment, a realm unto itself, with its own weather, its own moods, and its own absolute dominion over anything that dares to cross it. But distance is only the first layer. The second, and perhaps more telling metric, is what we might call remoteness from human infrastructure. An island might be geographically distant, but if it possesses a deep water port and a long runway capable of handling commercial aircraft, its isolation is dramatically reduced. It is connected to the global network. The most isolated places lack these bridges. They have no airstrips or only short gravel ones for occasional daring small plane flights. Their harbors are not harbors at all, but open roadsteads where ships cannot dock, but must anchor offshore, transferring people and cargo in small boats through swells that can turn a simple operation into a day-long and often perilous endeavor. This brings us to the third ingredient, accessibility, or more accurately, the profound lack of it. How often does a ship call? For the truly isolated, the answer is not weekly or monthly, but perhaps quarterly or even annually. The arrival of a supply vessel is not a routine event. It is a landmark in the calendar, a lifeline that determines the rhythm of life, the availability of goods, and the very connection to the outside world. In these places, you cannot simply decide to leave. Your life is governed by the ship's schedule, a timetable written not by human haste, but by the vast, slow logistics of crossing an ocean. There is also a biological dimension to this isolation. For an ecologist, isolation is measured in the unique evolutionary pathways it creates. An island that has been separated from other land masses for millions of years becomes a cradle for endemism, species that exist nowhere else on Earth. This biological solitude is a powerful indicator of deep time isolation. It tells a story of a land that has been so difficult to reach. For so long, that life there has marched to the beat of its own quiet drum, evolving into forms found in no other forest, on no other shore. This isolation is a fragile treasure, a living museum that is terrifyingly vulnerable to the introduction of foreign species, from rats to weeds, that arrive with human visitors. Finally, we must consider the psychological dimension. True isolation is felt. It is the knowledge, etched into the mind of every resident and visitor, that help is not on the other side of the hill or a few hours' drive away. It is over the horizon, beyond a week or more of treacherous sea. This knowledge fosters a unique form of self-reliance and community interdependence. Everyone is essential. Every skill, from medicine to mechanics, is vital. The community becomes a single organism, reliant on its own parts for survival. This psychological weight, the constant, quiet awareness of the immense gulf between oneself and the rest of humanity is the ultimate, unquantifiable metric of isolation. So, when we speak of the most isolated island, we are not looking for a single champion. We are looking for a place that scores highly in all these categories: immense physical distance from any other land, a near total lack of modern infrastructure, infrequent and difficult access, a unique and sealed ecosystem, and the profound psychological reality of being truly, utterly on your own. It is a symphony of distance, logistics, biology, and spirit, a place where the map ends and the world begins again on its own ancient terms. If we were to take our definition of isolation and use it to search the globe, to find a place where all these elements converge not in a barren, icy rock, but around a living, breathing community, our compass would inevitably swing to a specific point in the South Atlantic Ocean. It would lead us to a tiny cluster of volcanic peaks rising from the abyssal plain, a place known as Tristan da Cunha. Officially, it holds the title, the most remote inhabited archipelago in the world. To find it, imagine a vast, empty blue canvas. To the east, the coast of southern Africa is over 2,800 kilometers, or 1,700 miles away. To the west, the nearest point in South America is more than 3,200 kilometers, or 2,000 miles distant. This is not a crossing, it is an expedition. The island does not appear gradually on the horizon. It emerges, a stark and dramatic silhouette, as if the ocean floor itself has clenched a fist and punched through the skin of the sea. The main island, often simply called Tristan, is a study in dramatic geography. At its heart rises Queen Mary's Peak, a volcano that is not dormant but merely sleeping, its summit often shrouded in a wreath of cloud. The slopes of this mountain fall sharply to a narrow, green plateau, which in turn gives way to cliffs that defy the constant assault of the waves. There are no natural harbors here. The sea does not welcome visitors. It tolerates them only when its mood is calm. The story of human habitation on Tristan is as unique as its location. It was not settled by an ancient, seafaring people, but is a creation of the 19th century. Its origins lie in a combination of military strategy and personal tragedy. In 1810, an American named Jonathan Lambert, along with two other men, declared themselves the rulers of the islands, with a plan to establish a trading post. This venture was short-lived, but the idea of a settlement took root. A few years later, the British garrisoned the island to prevent it from being used as a base to rescue Napoleon from his exile on the much closer island of St. Helena. When the garrison left, a Scottish corporal named William Glass made a momentous decision. He asked to stay, accompanied by his wife and two other men. From this tiny seed of 5 people, the modern community of Tristan da Cunha has grown. Today, the entire population of the archipelago, just under 250 souls, lives in a single settlement, Edinburgh of the 7 Seas. It is a village that feels both timeless and profoundly isolated. The houses, scattered across the only patch of flat land, are built to withstand the fierce winds that roar unimpeded from Antarctica. There is one road, one church, one school, one shop, and one hospital. The rhythm of life is dictated not by traffic or headlines, but by the weather, the fishing, and the farming of small plots of land. The connection to the wider world is a thread, not a cable. A fishing vessel from South Africa makes the journey a handful of times each year, carrying mail, supplies, and the rare tourist. There is no airstrip. The only way on or off the island is by a multi-day sea voyage, followed by a precarious transfer from ship to shore in a small, open boat. This journey is entirely dependent on the mood of the South Atlantic, which can change from a gentle swell to a raging tempest in a matter of hours. For the people of Tristan, a trip to the outside world is not a holiday. It is a major life event, planned for months and remembered for years. Life here is a master class in community and self-reliance. Everyone knows everyone. The society functions on a system of cooperation and shared responsibility that would be unimaginable in a city of millions. The economy is built on the sea, specifically a lobster fishery that is meticulously managed to ensure its sustainability. The islanders are the guardians of their own world, acutely aware that their survival depends on the delicate balance they maintain with their environment. Tristan da Cunha is more than a dot on a map. It is a testament to the human capacity to build a life at the very edge of the possible. It is a living, breathing kingdom of solitude, where the community is the castle, and the endless, rolling sea is both its moat and its realm. It is a reminder that even in the most remote corner of the world, the human spirit has found a way to not just endure, but to create a home. To understand Tristan da Cunha is to understand that its true wonder is not the volcano that formed it, nor the immense ocean that surrounds it, but the community that has taken root in this most unlikely of soils. Life here, for the few hundred residents, is a delicate and deliberate dance with isolation, a rhythm shaped by mutual dependence, profound self-reliance, and a quiet, unshakable peace. The heart of this existence is the village, Edinburgh of the Seven Seas, though the islanders often simply call it the settlement. It is a cluster of brightly colored houses, scattered like a handful of cheerful pebbles across the only patch of habitable flat land. There are no streets bustling with traffic, only a single main road, more of a lane, that connects the community. The air carries the scent of peat smoke from the hearths and the salty tang of the sea. The soundtrack of life is not the hum of engines, but the constant wind, the cries of seabirds, and the distant, rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs. In a society of this size, everyone is essential. The concept of a stranger is a rarity. The community operates like a large, extended family, bound by a shared history and a shared fate. There are only 7 surnames on the island, a living record of those original founders: Glass, Green, Hagen, Lavarello, Repetto, Rogers, and Swain. This deep interconnectedness fosters a level of cooperation that is the bedrock of survival. When a new house needs building, the community builds it. When the potato patches need harvesting, neighbors work side by side. The success of one is intertwined with the well-being of all. The economy, and indeed the diet, is anchored in the sea. The Tristanian rock lobster, or crayfish, is the lifeblood of the island, processed in a small factory and exported to the world. This single, carefully managed industry funds the community's needs. The men who crew the fishing boats are the lifeline, braving the unpredictable South Atlantic to harvest this precious resource. On land, small plots known as patches are tended for potatoes, the island's staple vegetable. Cattle and sheep graze on the more gentle slopes, their ownership a matter of careful record-keeping and communal understanding. The challenges of this life are as constant as the wind. The supply ship, which arrives only a handful of times each year, dictates the availability of everything from medical supplies to building materials to treats for the children. A missed shipment due to bad weather can mean months of waiting. Healthcare, while supported by a small hospital and a dedicated nursing team, is limited. Serious medical emergencies require a complex and perilous evacuation by ship, a journey that can take over a week to reach advanced care in Cape Town. This reality is a quiet, accepted weight carried by every islander. Yet within these constraints lies a profound and unique peace. There is no rush hour, no noise pollution, and very little of the frantic pace that defines modern life. Time seems to move with the rhythm of the seasons and the tides. The social fabric is strong and secure. Children play freely and safely, knowing every adult in the village is a guardian. The sense of belonging is absolute. There is a deep, abiding connection to the land itself, not as a possession, but as a shared inheritance to be protected for the next generation. Evenings are spent in homes, not in front of a flood of digital entertainment, but in conversation, handicrafts, or community gatherings. The social hub remains the pub, the Albatross Bar, a place for sharing stories and strengthening bonds. The church is another center of community life, its steeple a comforting landmark against the dramatic backdrop of the volcano. Life on Tristan da Cunha is not for everyone. It demands a temperament that finds comfort in familiarity and quiet, and that accepts the limitations of this remote kingdom as the price for its profound gifts. It is a life stripped of superfluous choice, revealing what is truly essential: family, community, and a deep, resonant connection to the place one calls home. It is a society that has chosen, consciously and deliberately, to preserve its unique way of life at the edge of the world, proving that a community can be small in number, yet immeasurably rich in spirit. The community of Tristan da Cunha, with its quiet lanes and warm hearths, presents a picture of gentle resilience. But this peace is a tenant on land born of violence. The very ground beneath the islanders' feet, the soaring peak that defines their skyline, and the sheer cliffs that make their home so inaccessible, all whisper a single, elemental truth. This is a kingdom forged by fire. The story of Tristan is, first and foremost, a geological drama. The archipelago is not a fragment of a lost continent, but a creation ex nihilo, born from the depths of the South Atlantic Ocean. It is the peak of a massive shield volcano, one of the most prominent on Earth, rising from an abyssal plain more than 3 kilometers below the sea's surface. The main island is merely the tip of this submerged mountain, a monument to the restless energy that churns deep within the planet. This is a hotspot volcano, where a plume of exceptionally hot rock from the mantle has burned a hole through the Earth's crust, forcing molten rock to the surface in a continuous, slow-motion fountain over millions of years. At the center of it all is Queen Mary's Peak, a volcano that stands at 2,060 meters, or 6,760 feet. It is not extinct. It is dormant, a sleeping giant whose breath still sometimes forms a white plume of water vapor at its summit. The entire landscape is a testament to its power. The slopes are rugged and steep, carved by deep gorges that channel rainwater from the high, often cloud-shrouded summit down to the sea. There are no gentle, sandy beaches, only cliffs of black volcanic rock against which the ocean endlessly pounds, and a coastline littered with the dramatic, twisted forms of ancient lava flows. This fiery origin is the ultimate architect of Tristan's profound isolation. Because it was born in the middle of a tectonic plate, far from the collaborative chaos of continental collisions, it stands alone. There was no neighboring land to which it was ever connected. It emerged from the waves as a solitary entity, and so it has remained. The very forces that built it also ensured its seclusion, placing it hundreds of miles from any other piece of land. The volcano is not just a backdrop, it is an active character in the island's story. The most dramatic reminder of this came in 1961. After centuries of quiet, the earth grumbled and a new volcanic vent opened on the outskirts of the settlement. Lava flows threatened the potato patches, and the entire population was forced to evacuate by ship to the United Kingdom. For 2 years, the islanders lived in a world utterly alien to them, a world of cities, industry, and noise. But the pull of their island home was stronger than the comforts of the modern world. When geologists declared it safe, almost every family chose to return, sailing back across the Atlantic to rebuild their lives from the ash-strewn ground. The eruption had not broken them. It had, if anything, solidified their bond with the land. The volcanic soil, though thin and rocky in places, is also surprisingly fertile. It supports the hardy grasses that feed the island's cattle and sheep, and when carefully nurtured, produces the potatoes that are a staple of the Tristanian diet. The rainfall, captured by the high peak, provides fresh water. In a profound paradox, the same violent forces that forced the islanders to flee also provide the foundation for their sustenance. To stand in the shadow of Queen Mary's Peak is to feel the immense, ancient power of the earth. It is a reminder that this secluded haven is not a static monument, but a living, breathing geological entity. The peace of the settlement is all the more precious because it is earned, a gentle human interlude in the long, fiery story of a volcano rising from the deep. The island's heart still beats with fire, and its people live in respectful, knowing harmony with the slumbering giant that is both their creator and their greatest challenge. If Tristan da Cunha represents the far frontier of human habitation, a place where community softens the edge of solitude, then our journey now takes us to a place beyond that frontier. We voyage into a realm of pure, unadulterated wilderness, to a land where the very concept of a visitor is a paradox. We travel to Bouvet Island, a place that holds a title of even more stark and absolute grandeur, the most isolated piece of land anywhere on Earth. To find Bouvet, we must sail far south of Tristan, deep into the tempestuous, ice-chilled waters of the Southern Ocean. It is a speck of rock and ice located at 54 degrees south, a latitude known not for its trade winds, but for its screaming westerlies and colossal waves. The nearest land is the uninhabited coast of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica, over 1,700 kilometers, or 1,000 miles, to the south. The closest point of Africa is more than 2,500 kilometers, or 1,550 miles away. This is not merely remote. This is the planetary epitome of alone. The ocean here is an uninterrupted, howling expanse, circling the bottom of the world. Bouvet Island does not welcome approach. It announces itself not as a green haven, but as a monstrous fortress of ice and stone. Over 93% of its surface is encased in a permanent, crushing glacier, a dome of ice that flows relentlessly down to the sea, terminating in colossal cliffs that rise hundreds of feet straight out of the black, churning water. The remaining 7% is barren, black volcanic rock, scraped clean by ice and scoured by winds that rarely cease. There are no beaches, only a violent meeting of ice and water. There is no vegetation, save for the most tenacious lichens and mosses clinging to life in sheltered crevices. The color palette is reduced to its most elemental, the blinding white of the ice, the stark black of the basalt, the deep gray of the sky, and the frigid blue of the sea. The island is, in essence, the tip of a volcano that has been sculpted by ice. It is a shield volcano, much like Tristan, but one that exists in a climate so severe that its form has been radically altered. The central crater is buried under the ice cap, and the relentless freeze-thaw cycles have shattered its slopes into treacherous, unstable screes. The air is filled with the constant sound of the environment in motion, the groan of shifting glaciers, the crash of falling seracs, the roar of katabatic winds screaming down from the ice cap, and the thunder of waves exploding against the unyielding coast. This is a land that has never known and could never support a human population. It is a place utterly devoid of human history in the traditional sense. There are no ruins, no artifacts, no signs of settlement. Its history is one of discovery and attempted visitation, a chronicle of frustration and near misses. It was first sighted in 1739 by the French explorer Jean-Baptiste Charles Bouvet de Lozier, who gave the island its name. Yet for decades after, its exact location remained a mystery, a phantom on the charts that other explorers failed to relocate in the vast, featureless sea. Even when its position was firmly established, landing on Bouvet remained and still remains a feat of extreme endurance and luck. To set foot on Bouvet is to confront the absolute indifference of the natural world. There is no shelter, no resource, no comfort. The weather can change from merely harsh to life-threatening in moments. The few scientific expeditions that have managed to land have done so only for brief periods, establishing automated weather stations or conducting vital geological and biological surveys before being forced to retreat by the elements. They leave behind no permanent mark, their footprints and equipment soon buried by snow and scoured by wind. And yet, in this seemingly lifeless place, there is a startling, fierce vitality. The true inhabitants of Bouvet Island are not human. The steep, black cliffs and the few ice-free moraines are home to vast colonies of seabirds, penguins, including chinstrap and macaroni, and other seabirds like petrels and skuas, whose cacophony of calls is the island's only true voice. The waters surrounding it are rich with krill, attracting seals and whales. This teeming life, set against the sterile backdrop of ice and rock, creates a paradox of its own. Bouvet is not a dead world. It is a world that thrives entirely without us, a bustling, noisy, and fiercely competitive ecosystem that has evolved in perfect, pristine isolation. Bouvet Island is the ultimate expression of geographical solitude. It is a place where the maps truly run out, where the only laws are those of geology and climate. It stands as a silent, glacial sentinel in the Southern Ocean, a monument not to human perseverance, but to the raw, untamable power of the planet. It is a reminder that there are still places on Earth that belong not to us, but to the ice, the rock, the wind, and the sea. It is the most isolated island, not because it is lonely, but because it is complete in its own wild, formidable self. To speak of Bouvet Island is to describe a world not meant for life as we know it. It is a realm where the elements have been reduced to their most potent and primal states, a stark dialogue between ice and rock, played out on a stage of endless, raging sea. If other islands offer solitude, Bouvet offers something else entirely, a vision of the planet in its raw, untamed infancy, a place where the very concepts of welcome and hostility have no meaning, for there is no mind to perceive them. The first and most constant presence is the wind. It is not a breeze that comes and goes, but a permanent, sculpting force. It screams down from the immense glacial dome, a katabatic river of frozen air, so powerful it can tear the breath from your lungs and hurl pebbles like shrapnel. This wind carries with it a fine, abrasive mist of ice crystals, a diamond dust that blurs the line between air and land, stinging any exposed surface and polishing the black volcanic rock to a dull, somber gleam. The sound is a perpetual, low roar, a bass note underlying all other sensations, the voice of the island itself. And then there is the ice. The glacier that smothers Bouvet is not a gentle blanket of snow, but a living, moving entity. It is a river of ice, flowing with an imperceptible but immense pressure, grinding the mountain beneath it into flour. At its edges, where this frozen river meets the ocean, it calves. But here, there are no dramatic blue-white icebergs tumbling into calm waters. Instead, the ice meets the black, churning sea in a sheer, vertical cliff, often hundreds of feet high. This is the calving front, a wall of ancient, compressed ice, groaning and cracking under its own weight. The collapses are thunderous, explosive events that send house-sized blocks of ice into the surf, triggering waves that radiate out across the empty ocean. The sea at the base of these cliffs is a chaotic soup of brash ice and frozen debris, a no-man's land between two powerful, indifferent worlds. Contrary to the image of a smooth, white dome, the landscape is one of violent contrast. The ice, under the pressure of its own weight, fractures into deep, hidden crevasses, their blue depths hinting at an inner, frozen light. Between the glacial tongues and along the coast, the underlying rock is exposed, jet black basalt, the frozen foam of the Earth's fiery interior. This rock is not weathered gently by time, but shattered by the relentless cycle of freezing and thawing, creating fields of sharp, unstable scree that shift and slide underfoot. In a few rare, sheltered coves, the glaciers grind the rock into a coarse, black sand, creating beaches of startling darkness, where the waves wash up not with a gentle hiss, but with a grinding roar, pushing the dark sand and pebbles back and forth in a slow, geological rhythm. The light here is as unique as the land. Under the heavy, low-hanging cloud cover that dominates most days, the world is rendered in a monochrome palette of gray, white, and black. But when the sun does break through, the effect is transformative. The glacier blazes with a blinding, pure white light, while the exposed rock seems to absorb the sun, its blackness becoming even more profound. On the rare, clear nights, the aurora australis, the southern lights, might dance in silent, shimmering curtains of green and purple, their ethereal beauty a stark counterpoint to the brutal solidity of the island below. There is no artificial light to compete, only the cold, sharp brilliance of the stars. To be here is to feel a profound temporal displacement. This is not a landscape that remembers human history, for it has none. It is a landscape that remembers ice ages. It feels ancient, not in the romantic sense of ruins and stories, but in the planetary sense of a world still being shaped by fundamental, colossal forces. The feeling is not one of peace, but of awe, a humbling, almost terrifying recognition of a planet that is largely indifferent to the delicate biology of which we are a part. Bouvet Island is a kingdom where ice is the sovereign and rock is the throne. It is a land of absolute elements, a masterpiece of desolation that commands a silent, fearful respect. It does not care if you come or go, if you live or die upon its shores. It simply is, a permanent frozen sentinel in the circling swell of the Southern Ocean, forever holding its watch over a world of its own. The sheer, unyielding wilderness of Bouvet Island, a kingdom of ice and rock, seems to reject the very notion of human narrative. Its history is written in glaciers and volcanic stone, not in diaries or logbooks. Yet in 1964, this most isolated place on Earth became the setting for a brief, deeply unsettling mystery. A single, enigmatic clue that whispered of human drama amidst the eternal roar of the elements, and one that remains unsolved to this day. It was during a scientific reconnaissance expedition from South Africa. The crew of the RRS-RSA, tasked with mapping and studying the island, decided to attempt a landing on a rare, less tempestuous day. As their helicopter circled, searching for a place to set down on the treacherous ice-free western coast, they saw something that should not, by any logical measure, have been there. In a small, sheltered lagoon, cut off from the open sea by a steep, rocky bar, was a lifeboat. The image from the air was jarring. In the midst of this monochrome landscape of black sand and crushing ice, sat a manufactured object, a vessel of wood and metal painted white. It was half swamped, filled with water but otherwise intact. There were no signs of survivors, no camp, no distress signal, no footprints in the dark sand leading away from it. It was simply there. An abandoned lifeboat in the most inaccessible place on the planet, hundreds of miles from any shipping lane. The helicopter managed to land and the team investigated. They found the boat to be largely bare. There was no identifying markings, no nameplate, no registration number. The only potential clue was a pair of oars, a barrel, and a copper flotation tank, standard equipment for a ship's lifeboat, but offering no hint of its origin. There was no food, no water, no records, and crucially, no bodies. It was as if the boat and its occupants had been placed there by some unseen hand. The discovery sent a ripple through the small world of maritime authorities. Where had it come from? A Soviet whaler that had gone silent. A merchant vessel that had foundered in the ferocious Southern Ocean. An illegal fishing boat that met its end far from prying eyes. Theories were proposed, shipping records were scoured, but no missing ship could be conclusively matched to the derelict lifeboat. The very isolation of Bouvet, its very nature as a place beyond all normal routes and rescues, made the mystery all but impossible to solve. The most haunting questions are not about the boat itself, but about the people. What desperate series of events led a lifeboat, designed for survival to this specific, God-forsaken shore? Did they make it to the island only to succumb to the brutal cold and exposure, their bodies claimed by the ice and the sea? Or did they, in a final, tragic twist, manage to land and then, seeing the absolute hopelessness of their situation, re-enter the unforgiving ocean in a last, doomed attempt to find salvation elsewhere? We will almost certainly never know. The lifeboat itself has long since vanished, likely pulverized by storms and washed away, its materials reclaimed by the island. No further evidence has ever been found. The story of the Bouvet Island lifeboat is not a tale of adventure or discovery. It is a ghost story. It is a stark reminder that the ocean's most remote corners are not just empty. They are silent witnesses to countless, unrecorded tragedies. The lifeboat stands as a monument to the unknown, a single, chilling data point in the vast, dark ledger of the sea. It underscores Bouvet's profound and unsettling isolation not with science, but with story. A story without a beginning or an end. A question mark forever etched onto the ice and rock of the world's loneliest island. From the frozen, uninhabited fortress of Bouvet Island, our journey now carries us across the globe, into the vast, sun-drenched expanse of the Pacific. We arrive at an island that is, in its own way, just as isolated, but whose story is written not in ice, but in stone and in the poignant echoes of a lost world. This is Rapa Nui, known to many as Easter Island. Here, we encounter a different kind of solitude altogether, not the emptiness of a land without people, but the profound, historical isolation of a people without a world. Easter Island is one of the most remote inhabited islands on Earth. Its nearest inhabited neighbor is Pitcairn Island, a staggering 2,075 kilometers, or 1,300 miles to the west. The coast of Chile lies over 3,500 kilometers, or 2,200 miles to the east. The Polynesian sailors who discovered it around the 12th century did not find a stepping stone. They found a final refuge, a continental cul-de-sac. Once they settled, the ocean that had carried them there became an insurmountable wall. For centuries, the world of the Rapa Nui people was the island itself, a tiny, triangular universe measuring just 24 kilometers at its longest side. This extreme geographical isolation created a cultural and historical isolation of unparalleled intensity. While empires rose and fell in Europe and Asia, while the Maya built their pyramids and the Renaissance flourished, the society on Rapa Nui developed in a bubble. They had no contact with any other human beings. No trade, no war, no exchange of ideas. Their entire cosmos was contained within this small piece of land, and their culture turned inward, evolving in ways that are unique in human history. The most breathtaking testament to this inward focus is the moai, the nearly 900 colossal stone figures that stand, or lie, across the island. Carved from compressed volcanic ash at a single quarry in the heart of the island, the Rapa Nui people, over generations, dedicated an immense portion of their society's energy and resources to the creation and transport of these statues. They were not built for an outside audience. There was none. They were built for themselves, as manifestations of ancestral power and lineage, facing inward to protect the villages, not outward to the sea. The moai are the ultimate symbol of a culture speaking only to itself, a monumental conversation between the living and the dead, played out on the most isolated stage imaginable. This deep isolation also set the stage for one of history's most cautionary tales. Cut off from the world, the Rapa Nui people were entirely dependent on the island's own resources. As their society grew and the statue-building culture intensified, the fragile ecosystem was pushed to its limit. Evidence suggests that the once lush palm forests were cleared for agriculture and to move the moa. Without trees, the soil eroded, bird populations vanished, and canoes could no longer be built for deep-sea fishing. The very isolation that had protected them for so long became a trap. With no means of escape and no new resources to draw upon, the society faced a profound crisis, leading to conflict, famine, and a dramatic population decline. The arrival of Europeans in the 18th century shattered this ancient isolation with brutal swiftness. The outside world, when it finally came, brought disease, slave raids, and social collapse, further devastating the population and severing the last living connections to the old ways. The moa were toppled, and a rich, complex culture was nearly erased. Today, Easter Island is connected by regular flights from Chile. Tourists walk among the silent moa. But the isolation it experienced for nearly 5 centuries is etched into its very soul. The moa do not just stand as mysterious monuments. They stand as silent witnesses to the incredible creativity and resilience that can flourish in solitude, and to the profound vulnerability that such solitude creates. Easter Island's story is a powerful reminder that isolation is not just a matter of physical distance on a map. It is a force that can shape a civilization, driving it to both breathtaking heights and, when that isolation becomes a prison, to a tragic and irreversible fall. It is a monument to a world that was, for a time, truly and completely alone. To stand before a moa on the slopes of Raraku is to stand in the presence of one of the most powerful and enigmatic testaments to human endeavor. These are not mere statues. They are the silent, stone-hearted sentinels of a civilization that flourished in a world of its own making. Their blind eyes, gazing across the rolling green hills, hold the story of a society that turned its immense creative energy inward, forging a culture of staggering ambition in the most profound isolation the Pacific has ever known. The quarry at Raraku is the birthplace of this vision. It is a landscape that feels both sacred and industrial, a factory frozen in time. Here, the Rapa Nui people discovered a seam of compressed volcanic ash, a rock called tuff, which was firm enough to endure, yet soft enough to be shaped with stone tools. Walking among the nearly 400 figures still in various stages of completion is to witness a process abruptly halted. Some are little more than outlines sketched onto the rock face. Others are nearly free, connected to the mountain by a thin spine of stone, awaiting the final blow that would release them. The largest, named El Gigant, lies unfinished, a colossal 70-foot giant that would have weighed nearly 270 tons, a testament to an ambition that ultimately outstripped the island's capacity. The creation of a single moa was an act of faith and community that spanned generations. Using hand-held basalt picks called toki, teams of craftsmen would patiently carve the distinct features: the strong brow, the long, straight nose, the pursed lips holding an expression of serene, unyielding authority. This was not the work of slaves, as once was thought, but likely a sacred duty, a way to honor ancestral chiefs and clan leaders, whose supernatural power or mana was believed to be channeled through the finished statue. But the carving was only the beginning. The true, almost unimaginable feat was the journey. How did a society without the wheel, without draft animals, without metal, transport these multi-ton giants across miles of rugged terrain to stone platforms called Ahu on the coast? The answer is a masterpiece of human ingenuity and collective effort. The prevailing theory suggests the statues were walked upright. Using a system of ropes, teams would rock the moai back and forth, edging it forward with each sway, a slow, perilous, and rhythmic dance that inched the ancestor into its place of power. It was a process that required the coordinated labor of hundreds, a physical manifestation of a society united by a common spiritual and cultural goal. Upon reaching its Ahu, the final act of consecration took place, the setting of the eyes. The empty eye sockets were inlaid with rings of white coral, with a pupil of obsidian or red scoria. To place the eyes was to awaken the statue, to instill it with its mana. Once completed, the moai was no longer a block of stone. It was a living presence, an ancestor facing the village with its back to the spiritual void of the sea, a watchful guardian ensuring fertility and order for the community. For centuries, this cycle of creation sustained the Rapa Nui people. The moai were the focal point of their universe, the physical proof of their lineage and their connection to the divine. But this very focus, this inward-looking monumental project, also contained the seeds of struggle. The island was a closed system. The relentless demand for timber, for rollers and levers, and for rope contributed to the deforestation of the island's once dense palm forests. As resources dwindled, the society that had been unified by the shared goal of building the moai began to fracture. The silent sentinels bear witness to this collapse. In the later period, the statue-building culture reached a crescendo of scale and competition, even as the ecological foundation crumbled. Then it stopped. The quarry was abandoned, tools dropped. In the ensuing crisis, the clans turned on each other. The very symbols of their power, the moai, were systematically toppled. The ancestors were thrown face down, their stone eyes blinded, their mana shattered. The era of the sentinels was over. Today, the moai stand erected, but their silence is profound. They speak of a people who achieved the extraordinary with nothing but stone, muscle, and faith. They are a breathtaking monument to what is possible when human creativity is concentrated by isolation. But they are also a solemn memorial to the fragility of that same ambition. They remind us that no society, no matter how brilliant or spiritually rich, exists in a vacuum. They are the eternal sentinels, guarding not just the shores of Rapa Nui, but the poignant, universal lesson of a civilization that, in its glorious isolation, both built its heaven and unearthed its limits from the very same stone. As we contemplate the silent, stone witnesses of Rapa Nui, a question arises that is as profound as the moai themselves. In a world of endless blue, with no compass, no chart, and no sight of land, how did human beings ever find this tiny, isolated speck? The answer lies not in stone, but in the sea, and in one of the most breathtaking chapters of human courage and ingenuity ever written, the story of the Polynesian voyagers. Before we can understand the isolation of the islands, we must first stand in awe of the journeys that breached it. The settlement of the Pacific was not an accident of drifting canoes, but a deliberate, masterful campaign of exploration and colonization. It was the last great migration of the ancient world, a slow, relentless expansion across an ocean that covers nearly a third of our planet. The Polynesians were not lost, they were searching, and their tools were not made of metal, but of knowledge, passed down through generations in a sacred living library. Imagine the vessel for a moment, the double-hulled canoe or waiakalua, two long hulls fastened together by a strong platform carrying a small society, men, women, children, plants, and animals, everything needed to start a new life on an unknown shore. These were not fragile rafts, but seaworthy ships, capable of voyages lasting weeks, even months, across thousands of miles of open ocean. They were sailing into a void, guided by a science so refined it bordered on art. This art was called wayfinding. The Polynesian navigator, the PWO, did not use a sextant or a magnetic needle. He was a human instrument calibrated to the rhythms of the natural world. His map was the sky. He knew the paths of hundreds of stars, understanding that each one rose and set at a specific point on the horizon. By memorizing this celestial compass, he could hold a course through the night, his direction fixed by the silent, wheeling lights above. But his senses reached far beyond the stars. By day, he watched the sun, the quality of the light, and the subtle patterns of the swells. The Pacific does not move in a random chaos of waves. It has a rhythm, a great oceanic pulse. Long, deep ocean swells, generated by distant weather systems, march in steady formations. A skilled navigator could feel these swells through the hull of his canoe, recognizing their direction and their interplay. A change in their pattern could indicate an island over the horizon, its mass disrupting the deep water rhythm long before it was visible to the eye. He read the clouds. A puffy, stationary cloud in an otherwise clear sky could mark the presence of a high island, its peaks trapping moist air. The color of the sky itself held clues. A faint, greenish tint on the underside of a cloud, known as T. Lapa or lightning, was believed to be a reflection from a lagoon. He watched the birds. The flight patterns of certain seabirds, like the tern and the booby, were living compasses. Their morning flights out to sea and their evening returns to land revealed the direction and distance to unseen shores, extending the navigator's sight for hundreds of miles. This was a knowledge system built on memory, on sensation, and on a deep, spiritual connection to the ocean, which was not a barrier, but a pathway. It was a way of knowing that saw the ocean as a textured, living entity, filled with signs and meanings. The courage required to act on this knowledge is almost beyond our modern comprehension. To set sail from a known island, like the Marquesas or the Society Islands, towards the empty eastern horizon, with the faith that your skills would lead you to land that you had only ever seen in the stories of your ancestors, was an act of supreme faith and fortitude. It was these navigators, these wayfinders, who first broke the profound solitude of islands like Rapa Nui, Hawaii, and Aotearoa, New Zealand. They did not just stumble upon them, they found them. They sailed into the emptiness and returned with new worlds. When the first Polynesian settlers stepped onto the shores of Rapa Nui, they were not castaways. They were the vanguard of a purposeful expedition. They brought with them the seeds of the sweet potato and the taro, the chickens and the Polynesian rats, and the cultural knowledge to build a new society. Their achievement redefines our understanding of isolation, for the islands were only isolated from the perspective of the outside world. For centuries, they were connected by a web of knowledge, of shared ancestry, and of epic voyages. The true silence fell later, when for reasons still debated, the long-distance voyages ceased and the web frayed, leaving each island to its own unique destiny. So, as we consider these lonely islands, let us first remember the navigators. Let us remember the canoes that were stars on the water, and the men who could read the language of the sea. They were the ones who first whispered to the silence of the Pacific, and for a time taught the empty ocean to answer. From the epic, star-guided voyages of the Polynesian navigators, we now turn to a story of a very different kind of journey, one born not of exploration, but of rebellion, fear, and the desperate hope for a hiding place beyond the reach of an entire empire. Our destination is Pitcairn Island, a name forever etched into legend by one of history's most famous maritime dramas, the Mutiny on the Bounty. Here, on a stage of just 4.6 square kilometers, a human story of idealism, violence, and survival unfolded in the world's most secluded theater. To understand Pitcairn, we must first set the scene in 1789, aboard His Majesty's armed vessel Bounty. Under the command of the notoriously strict Lieutenant William Bligg, the ship's mission was to transport breadfruit plants from Tahiti to the West Indies. The crew spent 5 months in Tahiti, a paradise that for many stood in stark contrast to the harsh discipline of the Royal Navy. After departing, led by the ship's charismatic acting lieutenant, Fletcher Christian, a group of mutineers seized control of the ship. They set Bligg and 18 loyal crewmen adrift in the ship's launch in the middle of the Pacific, an act that was, under British law, a capital offense. The mutineers were now men with a price on their heads, hunted fugitives in a world dominated by the British Empire. Their initial return to Tahiti was only a temporary solution. It was a known port, a certain path to discovery and the gallows. Fletcher Christian and 8 of his fellow mutineers knew they needed to vanish completely. Using Captain Bligg's charts and memoirs, they scoured his records for an island that was mischarted, a place the Royal Navy would likely never find. They discovered Pitcairn. When the Bounty arrived at Pitcairn in 1790, they found a place that perfectly suited their desperate needs. It was a high, volcanic island with rugged cliffs and no safe harbor. Most importantly, it was located nearly 90 miles from its charted position. To the British Admiralty, it was effectively invisible. The mutineers sailed the Bounty into what is now known as Bounty Bay, stripped it of everything useful, and then set it ablaze, severing their last tangible link to the world they had fled. They were now truly marooned by their own design, but they were not alone. Accompanying the 9 mutineers were 6 Tahitian men and 12 Tahitian women, whom the mutineers had essentially kidnapped to serve as their companions and laborers in this new society. This volatile mix of people, British sailors and Tahitian islanders, bound together by force and circumstance on a tiny, inescapable island, created a powder keg of cultural conflict, jealousy, and resentment. The first years on Pitcairn were a descent into a dark and violent nightmare. The mutineers, particularly one named John Williams, treated the Tahitian men with brutality, as slaves rather than partners. The limited resources, especially the women, became a source of intense friction. Within 3 years, the tensions erupted into a bloody conflict. The Tahitian men rose up and killed several of the mutineers, including Fletcher Christian. In a brutal cycle of revenge, the remaining mutineers then killed the Tahitian men. When the smoke cleared, only 4 of the original mutineers remained alive, along with the Tahitian women and their children. This period of violence cast a long shadow, but from its ashes, a new society slowly began to form. The surviving community, led by the mutineer John Adams, found a fragile peace. Adams, who experienced a profound religious conversion, turned to the Bounty's Bible and began to build a devout communal society based on its teachings. He became the patriarch, the father, to a growing generation of children who knew no other world than Pitcairn. They developed a unique dialect, a blend of 18th century English and Tahitian, and a culture that was a singular fusion of their parents' heritages. The outside world did not rediscover Pitcairn until 1808, when the American sealing ship Topaz happened upon the island. The crew was astonished to find a thriving community descended from the infamous mutineers, whose fate had been one of the great mysteries of the sea. John Adams was eventually granted amnesty for his part in the mutiny, in recognition of the peaceful Christian society he had fostered. Today, the descendants of that original, fraught community still call Pitcairn home. Their story is the ultimate human drama of isolation. It is a tale that begins with the highest stakes, rebellion, flight, and murder, and evolves into a narrative of redemption, cultural creation, and the enduring will to survive. Pitcairn Island is more than a dot on a map. It is a living monument to the fact that even on the world's smallest stage, with the curtains drawn shut by 1,000 miles of ocean, the full spectrum of the human experience, its darkness and its light, will always, inevitably, play out. The story of Pitcairn Island did not end with the reconciliation of John Adams and his fledgling community. The peace that settled over the island after its bloody birth was a hard-won miracle, but it was only the beginning of a new, ongoing struggle. The community, forged in the fire of rebellion and tempered by isolation, now faces a challenge less dramatic than mutiny or murder, but in its own way just as existential: the quiet, creeping challenge of a dwindling and aging population in the 21st century. The society that evolved on Pitcairn over 2 centuries is a unique cultural artifact. The Pitcairn language, a melodic blend of 18th century maritime English and Tahitian, is a living echo of its founders. Surnames like Christian, Young, and Warren still dominate the phone book, a direct lineage to the Bounty. For generations, life followed a rhythm dictated by the sea and the soil. The island was self-sufficient, sustained by fishing, farming, and a remarkable system of communal sharing and barter. In this closed world, everyone was family, and survival was a collective endeavor. The 20th century, however, began to pull at the threads of this tightly knit fabric. The opening of the Panama Canal in 1914 placed Pitcairn slightly closer to the world's shipping lanes, and the islanders became famous for their exquisite woodcrafts, which they would row out to passing ships to trade for essential goods. Yet, this same connection also offered a glimpse of a world beyond their steep cliffs. With the advent of radio and later limited satellite communication, the immense psychological distance that had protected and imprisoned them began to shrink. The modern challenges are a complex web, each strand tightening around the community's future. The most pressing is simple demographics. From a peak of over 200 in the early 20th century, the permanent population has plummeted to fewer than 50 souls, many of whom are middle-aged or older. Young people, seeking education, career opportunities, and a social life beyond their few dozen relatives, almost invariably leave for New Zealand or Australia. They often do not return. This creates a vicious cycle. A smaller population means a greater burden on those who remain to maintain the island's infrastructure and services, which in turn makes the island less appealing for the young. The economy, once based on subsistence and barter, now hinges precariously on a few fragile pillars. The sale of postage stamps to collectors, once a significant revenue stream, has dwindled in the digital age. The honey from the island's disease-free bees is a prized but small-scale export. In the early 2000s, the island attempted to launch an internet-based economy, selling domain names and other digital goods, with limited success. Today, the most reliable source of income is a trickle of tourism. A handful of cruise ships and private yachts visit each year, their passengers arriving via longboat through the treacherous surf of Bounty Bay to buy local crafts and hear the stories of their ancestors. But this, too, is unpredictable, entirely at the mercy of the weather and global travel trends. Life on modern Pitcairn is a paradox of connection and isolation. There is now satellite internet, a link to the global community that was unimaginable just a generation ago. This connection provides access to education, telemedicine, and the simple comfort of communicating with family abroad. Yet, it also highlights the gulf between their reality and the outside world. They can see the bustling, fast-paced life of the internet, a life of endless choice and convenience, which stands in stark contrast to their own, where a shipment of groceries might arrive only every 3 months, and a medical emergency can require a complex, days-long evacuation. The physical work of maintaining a community on Pitcairn is relentless. The few dozen residents are not just citizens. They are the mechanics, the boat operators, the nurses, the power plant operators, and the road maintenance crew. They must collectively manage a hydroelectric system, a diesel generator, a water desalination plant, and the island's only road, which winds precariously up the cliff from the landing. Every task, from building a house to repairing a generator, requires the labor of nearly every able-bodied person. There is no calling a specialist. The community is the specialist. Yet, against these daunting odds, the spirit of the Bounty mutineers, a stubborn, defiant resilience, endures. The people of Pitcairn are fiercely proud of their unique heritage and their home. They are custodians of a history that captivates the world, and they are determined to preserve it. Efforts are ongoing to attract new residents, offering land grants and a chance at a different kind of life, one defined by community and nature rather than consumerism and noise. It is a difficult sell, but for a select few, the promise of a true frontier, of a place where every individual is essential, holds a powerful allure. Pitcairn's story is no longer about hiding from the world, but about finding a way to exist within it without disappearing. It is a community grappling with the most modern of dilemmas: how to preserve a unique identity and a deeply rooted way of life in a globalized age that constantly pulls its youth away. The island, once a perfect refuge, can no longer hide from the tides of change. Its future will depend on a new kind of rebellion, a rebellion against obscurity, a fight for relevance, and a quiet, determined refusal to let the world's most famous community fade into a ghost story. Our journey thus far has taken us to islands where human stories of community, rebellion, and survival are etched into the very landscape. But now, we shift our gaze to a different kind of isolation, one of profound and pristine emptiness. We venture into the Coral Sea, a vast aquatic realm northeast of Australia, to the scattered atolls and keys that have never known the footfall of permanent human habitation. These are places like Willis Island, Lihu Reef, and the Coringa Herald Archipelago, not homes, but sanctuaries of pure geology and biology, where nature conducts its ancient operations in uninterrupted silence. To approach one of these islands is to witness the earth in its most elemental form. They are not the dramatic, volcanic peaks of Tristan or Pitcairn, but the work of infinitely smaller, more patient architects, the coral polyp. Over millions of years, these tiny organisms have built limestone fortresses upon submerged volcanic plateaus. The result is the atoll, a ring of low-lying coral islands, or motus, encircling a central lagoon of breathtaking turquoise. The land is not rock, but sand, ground from coral and shell by the relentless waves. It is a landscape of stunning fragility, where the highest point may be just a few meters above the high tide line, a precarious balance between the growth of coral and the erosive power of the sea. The isolation of these places is defined not by the difficulty of reaching them, but by the impossibility of staying. They are water worlds. There is no fresh water to drink, save for what little can be caught during sporadic rains. The soil, where it exists at all, is thin and nutrient-poor, incapable of supporting agriculture. There are no deep, sheltered harbors, only treacherous reefs and shifting sandbars that make landing a delicate, often hazardous operation. These islands offer no sustenance, no shelter, and no future for a human community. Their isolation is an intrinsic defensive quality, a built-in resistance to colonization. Willis Island provides a fascinating exception that proves the rule. This tiny key, a mere 500 meters long, is the only spot in Australia's Coral Sea territories that hosts a human presence. A small, hardened weather station staffed by a rotating team of 3 meteorologists from the Australian Bureau of Meteorology. Established in 1921, its purpose is vital: to monitor cyclones and weather patterns in a vast and otherwise unobserved stretch of ocean. Life for the duty officers is a lesson in extreme functional solitude. They are temporary custodians in a world not meant for them, their existence entirely dependent on the supplies shipped in every few months. Their presence is a scientific vigil, a tiny pinprick of data gathering light in an immense, dark expanse of ocean, underscoring just how empty the surrounding thousands of square miles truly are. For the natural world, however, this emptiness is a blessing. These uninhabited sands are not barren, they are bursting with life. They are critical sanctuaries, some of the last truly pristine marine ecosystems on the planet. The coral reefs surrounding them are vibrant cathedrals of color, teeming with fish, mollusks, and crustaceans. The sandy keys themselves become nurseries for the cycle of life. They are among the most important seabird nesting sites in the world. Vast colonies of terns, boobies, frigate birds, and shearwaters turn the quiet islands into bustling, cacophonous cities during breeding season. The air thickens with their calls and the beat of countless wings. The ground is a mosaic of nests, eggs, and vulnerable chicks. And for the ancient mariners of the sea, the turtles, these shores are hallowed ground. Green turtles and hawksbills, themselves living relics, undertake epic migrations across the ocean to return to the very beaches where they were born. Here, under the cover of darkness, the females haul their heavy bodies ashore to dig nests in the warm sand and deposit the next generation. For these creatures, the isolation of the coral sea islands is not a barrier, but a shield. It is their greatest protection from the predators, pollution, and disruption that follow human presence. The silence on these islands is different from the silence of a frozen Bouvet or a historical Rapa Nui. It is a living silence, broken not by the wind alone, but by the rustle of a sheath of vegetation, the skittering of a ghost crab across the sand, and the distant, mournful cry of a seabird on the wing. It is the sound of a world going about its business, a world that does not acknowledge humanity because it has no need for it. To stand on such a shore is to feel like an intruder in the best possible way, a privileged witness to a planet that is still, in these precious few places, entirely self-possessed. The uninhabited sands of the coral sea remind us that isolation is not always a human condition. It can be a state of natural perfection. These islands are the keepers of a different kind of story, not of human endeavor, but of biological purity. They are the quiet, unsung heroes of the ocean, the pristine seeds from which life in the wider sea can regenerate. In their empty, sun-drenched sands lies a hope that some parts of the world can and will forever remain wild. To the human eye, an isolated island can appear as the very picture of solitude, a silent, wind-swept rock adrift in an endless blue. But this is an illusion of our own perception, a projection of our feelings onto a world that is, in fact, teeming with a life we are often too large, too loud, or too transient to notice. For the true residents of these remote shores, the ones born of salt and wave, these islands are not lonely outposts. They are the bustling, vibrant, and fiercely competitive metropolises of the open ocean. They are the nurseries, the marketplaces, and the sanctuaries upon which entire ecosystems depend. Step onto the shore of a remote atoll in the Coral Sea, or the windward cliffs of Tristan da Cunha, and you will be met not with silence, but with a wall of sound. The air itself seems to vibrate with the cacophony of a seabird city. This is the sound of life at its most fundamental and prolific. Tens, even hundreds of thousands of individuals crowd together, their collective voices, a symphony of squawks, shrieks, and guttural calls, creating a constant, roaring hum that can be heard from miles out to sea. This is the sound of the ocean's productivity made audible. Each species has staked its claim, partitioning the island into a vertical city of neighborhoods. The high, precarious cliff ledges are the domain of the soaring masters of the air, the albatross. With wingspans that can stretch over 3 meters, they are the ocean's long-distance voyagers, spending years at sea only returning to land to find a mate and raise a single, precious chick. Their courtship is a slow, ritualized dance, a language of precise bows and synchronized sky pointing, a bond forged for life in the midst of the chaotic crowd below. On the steeper, rocky slopes, the boobies and gannets claim their territory. Their lives are a study in dramatic, plunging efficiency. From great heights, they become living javelins, piercing the water's surface in a stunning dive to snatch fish from just below the waves. Their nests are simple, often just a scant circle of guano, but fiercely defended. Neighbors sit mere inches apart, their white plumage creating the illusion of a snow-covered mountainside, constantly bickering and jostling in a never-ending dispute over personal space. The lower, scrubby vegetation and sandy dunes belong to the terns and the noddies. These are the agile, frantic commuters of the colony, their flight a constant flutter of quick, sharp wing beats. They build their nests on the ground, a simple scrape in the sand which makes their chicks terrifyingly vulnerable. The air above them is patrolled by the pirates, the frigate birds. With long, scissor-like tails and angular wings, they are the kleptoparasites, harrying other birds until they disgorge their hard-won catch, a masterful, if lazy, strategy for survival. And beneath this feathered metropolis, at the water's edge, another community thrives. On sub-Antarctic islands like South Georgia or the windswept beaches of the Coral Sea Keys, the sound of the birds is joined by the deep, guttural barks and groans of seals. Here, massive elephant seals, bulls weighing up to 4 tons, engage in brutal, bloody battles for dominance and the right to a harem of females. The beaches become a chaotic, noisy, and pungent nursery, where newborn pups bleat for their mothers amidst the tumult. In the surf, fur seals dart with otter-like agility, their playful barks belying a fierce territorial nature. Then, under the cover of darkness, a different, more ancient ritual unfolds. The beaches, emptied of their diurnal noise, become a stage for one of nature's most profound journeys. The turtles return. Heavy with the weight of 100 eggs, a green turtle hauls her ancient body up the sand, leaving a singular track like the trail of a small tractor. With slow, deliberate movements, she excavates a chamber and deposits the future of her species, a clutch of leathery, white spheres. The work done, she covers her nest, camouflages it with sweeping flipper strokes and returns to the sea, leaving her offspring to their fate. For these hatchlings, the isolated island is both their cradle and their first perilous gauntlet, a sprint to the sea under the watchful eyes of ghost crabs and predatory birds. This is the secret life of an isolated island. It is a world of intense drama, of life and death played out on a scale that is both grand and intimately small. It is a world of staggering noise, pungent smells, and relentless activity. The isolation that to us feels like emptiness is, for them, a precious shield. It is the very condition that allows for this spectacular, chaotic, and vital abundance. These islands are not lonely. They are the beating, thriving, cacophonous heart of the open ocean. To witness this secret life is to understand that solitude is a human concept, and that in the wild, a lonely place is simply a place where life is allowed to be, gloriously and deafeningly, itself. From the sun-drenched, teeming atolls of the Coral Sea, our journey now turns towards a land of a completely different character. We voyage deep into the southern Indian Ocean, into the heart of the furious 50s, to a place that was so aptly named by its discoverer, the Desolation Islands. The Kerguelen archipelago is not a single island, but a large, fractured landmass, a submerged micro-continent that speaks of a different scale of time and isolation. Here, the feeling is not of tropical solitude, but of a grand, elemental, and overwhelming emptiness. The first sight of Kerguelen from the sea is a study in monochrome. The islands are a jumble of dark, volcanic rock, sculpted by ancient glaciers into deep fjords and sharp ridges. The slopes are not green, but a muted yellow-brown, covered in the dense, low-lying cushion plant known as Kerguelen cabbage, a hardy survivor in a land with no trees. The sky is almost perpetually a lid of low, fast-moving gray cloud, and the wind does not blow. It screams, whipping the sea into a maelstrom of whitecaps and driving horizontal rain that feels like needles on the skin. This is a landscape that feels old, worn down, and profoundly indifferent. The archipelago's remoteness is of a staggering magnitude. The nearest populated land is the island of Reunion, over 3,300 kilometers to the north. The Antarctic coast is some 2,000 kilometers to the south. The journey from Reunion itself takes about a week aboard the French supply vessel, the Marion Dufresne, which is the archipelago's sole lifeline to the world. There is no airstrip. To arrive in Kerguelen is to commit to a stay dictated by the slow, patient schedule of the sea. It was this very sense of absolute desolation that led the French explorer Yves Joseph de Kerguelen-Tremarec, upon his discovery in 1772, to report back to his king that he had found the central mass of a hypothetical southern continent, claiming it for France with the words, "I have found the South France." The reality, of course, was a far cry from a fertile new territory. Yet France maintains its claim to this day, administering Kerguelen as part of the French southern and Antarctic lands. The primary human presence is the Port-aux-Frances base, a collection of utilitarian buildings huddled on the shore of the Gulf of Morbihan, home to a rotating population of about 50 to 100 scientists, technicians, and support staff. Life at Port-aux-Frances is a study in organized, technological isolation. The base is a self-contained world, with its own power plant, workshops, and living quarters. The work here is dedicated to science, for Kerguelen is a natural laboratory of immense value. Geologists study its volcanic origins. Glaciologists monitor its shrinking ice caps. Biologists are fascinated by its unique, introduced species and the hardiness of its native ones. And atmospheric scientists value its pristine air, far from any industrial pollution, for monitoring the health of the planet. The researchers here are not settlers. They are temporary observers, a human presence that is both minimal and intensely focused. Outside the base, the true rulers of Kerguelen are revealed. The islands are a sanctuary for sub-Antarctic wildlife on a colossal scale. The beaches and valleys are crowded with enormous colonies of penguins, king penguins with their brilliant orange ear patches, and the smaller macaronis. The air is thick with the flight of countless seabirds, albatross, petrels, and skuas. The coastlines are dominated by elephant seals, their colossal, blubbery forms lying in heaps like beached river boulders, and fur seals, whose barks echo across the coves. The interior, however, tells a more complicated story. Introduced species like reindeer, rabbits, and cats brought by sealers in the 19th century, have run rampant, drastically altering the fragile ecosystem and creating a constant challenge for conservationists. To walk across the interior of Kerguelen is to feel a profound connection to the forces that shape planets. The wind is a constant physical pressure. The landscape is one of sweeping, treeless plains, glacial valleys, and sudden, dramatic peaks. The silence, when the wind briefly drops, is not soft, but immense and heavy. There is a sense of being on a world that is still being made, or perhaps one that is slowly being unmade by ice and weather. The Kerguelen archipelago does not offer the gentle melancholy of a Pacific atoll or the dramatic human history of a pitcairn. It offers something more primal, a vision of the earth as a powerful, untamable, and largely abiotic entity. It is a land where geology is the dominant narrative, and biology is a tenacious, albeit spectacular, sideshow. The Desolation Islands are not merely remote. They are a monument to the raw power of the subantarctic, a place where the planet is stripped back to its bones, reminding us that some corners of the world are meant not for life, but for the magnificent, enduring presence of rock, ice, and sky. To be a researcher on Kerguelen is to enter into a contract with time itself. It is to surrender the familiar rhythms of the world for a cycle dictated by the extreme tilt of the Earth and the relentless mood of the Southern Ocean. A year on the Desolation Islands is not a uniform stretch of months, but a journey through two distinct, opposing seasons, each imposing its own unique psychological landscape upon the small community at Port aux Francaise. It is a test of endurance, a lesson in patience, and an immersion in a form of beauty that is as harsh as it is sublime. The year begins not in January, but in the waning light of autumn as the southern hemisphere tilts away from the sun. The days shrink rapidly. The sun, already low in the sky, becomes a fleeting visitor, and by late May the long hibernage, the overwintering, begins. For nearly 6 months the base is enveloped in a profound twilight. The sun disappears entirely for weeks at a time, and the world is reduced to a palette of gray, black, and white. The darkness is not empty. It is filled with a roaring orchestra of wind. Storms roll in with terrifying regularity, their fury so intense that venturing outside the hardened buildings is forbidden, the howling gales threatening to lift a person from their feet. This is the season of introspection and interiority. The 50 or so hibernants are thrown back entirely upon their own resources and each other. The base becomes their entire universe, a capsule of light and warmth adrift in a sea of freezing darkness. Cabin fever is a real and present danger, fought back with routine. The shared meals in the canteen become vital social anchors. Evenings are filled with films from a limited library, board games, language lessons, and the meticulous maintenance of equipment. The small greenhouses, glowing under artificial light, become cherished sanctuaries, places to smell damp soil and growing things, a tactile rebellion against the sterile rock outside. The darkness outside the windows is absolute, a physical presence pressing against the glass, and in the quiet moments, the isolation can feel less like a geographical fact and more like a weight upon the soul. Yet this winter also holds a stark, terrible beauty. On a rare, clear night, when the wind drops to a whisper, the community will bundle up and step outside. The spectacle overhead is beyond anything imaginable in the light-polluted world. The Milky Way is a blazing river of diamonds, so bright it casts faint shadows. And then the true magic begins, the aurora australis. Silent, shimmering curtains of green and violet dance across the heavens, a celestial ballet of solar winds and magnetic fields. In these moments, the isolation transforms. It is no longer a prison, but a privilege. To witness such a display in utter silence and solitude is to feel a connection to the cosmos that is both humbling and exhilarating. Then, around late August, a change begins. The first hint is not warmth, but light. The sun returns, hesitantly at first, painting the peaks of Mount Ross in a golden pink alpenglow for a few precious minutes each day. The return of the light is a psychological liberation. Spirits lift palpably. As the calendar pushes into the austral summer from November to March, Kerguelen undergoes a breathtaking transformation. The snow retreats to the highest peaks, revealing the muted greens and browns of the tundra. The temperatures, while still cold, become manageable. The fierce winds, though ever present, are occasionally punctuated by days of startling calm. This is the season of frantic, purposeful activity. The base's population swells with the arrival of summer researchers. The long, 20-hour days are a gift, and they are used without waste. Field camps are established in remote corners of the archipelago. Biologists wade through colonies of thousands of king penguins, their cacophony filling the air. Geologists hike into the interior to study the ancient volcanic rock. The landscape, so forbidding in winter, now teems with life. Seal pups on the beaches, skuas defending their nests, and carpets of tiny, hardy flowers blooming in a desperate, rapid burst of reproduction. But the summer's beauty is deceptive. A sunny, calm morning can transform into a life-threatening blizzard in a matter of hours. The researchers must always be prepared, always aware that the archipelago's benign mood is temporary. The work is physically demanding and mentally intense, compressed into this short, precious window. When the supply ship, the Marian Dufresne, finally appears on the horizon at the end of summer, it brings with it a tumult of emotions. It is the end of the assignment for some, a return to family, to fresh food, to the noise and speed of the world. For the hibernants staying for another cycle, it is a last, vivid reminder of the life they have left behind. As the ship departs, taking the summer crowd with it, a profound silence descends once more. The base feels larger, emptier. A year on Kerguelen leaves an indelible mark. It teaches a deep, visceral understanding of resilience, both personal and planetary. The researcher leaves not just with data, but with the memory of the long winter's darkness and the brilliant, fleeting light of the southern summer. They have learned that true solitude can be both a burden and a gift, and that in the most desolate of places, one can find a stark, magnificent, and unforgettable beauty. Our journey has taken us to islands of pure wilderness, places that exist in a state of splendid, unpeopled isolation. But there is another category of remote island, one whose story is inextricably linked to the human desire to connect, to trade, and to conquer distance. These are the lighthouse islands of the great oceans, places like St. Helena in the South Atlantic and Amsterdam Island in the southern Indian Ocean. Their isolation was not an end in itself, but a strategic point in the vast, empty blue, a place of refuge, resupply, and often heartbreak in the age of sail. In the centuries when the world was knitted together by canvas and wind, the open ocean was a terrifying expanse. A voyage from Europe to the East Indies or around the Horn of Africa could take many months, with crews vulnerable to scurvy, starvation, and the caprice of the weather. In this context, an island, even a remote one, was a beacon of hope. It was a place to find fresh water, to hunt for meat, to repair a storm-battered ship, and to give weary sailors a few days on solid ground. These islands became vital waypoints, their names whispered on the decks of ships like promises. St. Helena, Ascension, Tristan da Cunha, Amsterdam Island. St. Helena is perhaps the most famous of these oceanic way stations. A volcanic fortress rising from the South Atlantic, it lay directly in the path of sailing ships returning to Europe from Asia and the Cape of Good Hope. For centuries, it was a vital logistical hub, controlled first by the Portuguese and then fiercely guarded by the British East India Company. Ships would stop to take on fresh water, vegetables, and meat. Its very existence shaped global trade routes, a tiny pinprick on the map that held immense strategic value. This role as a haven, however, also made it a perfect prison, most infamously for Napoleon Bonaparte, whose final years were spent in exile on its isolated slopes, a captive of the very remoteness that had once offered salvation to sailors. Further south, in the wilder latitudes of the Indian Ocean, lies Amsterdam Island. Unlike St. Helena, it never supported a permanent civilian population, but its role was no less critical. Discovered in the 16th century, it became a landmark for ships navigating the treacherous Southern Passage. It was a place to take on fresh water and to hunt the seals and whales that populated its shores. A small, transient community of sealers and whalers would sometimes overwinter there, living in brutal conditions to harvest the ocean's wealth. For a ship battling the roaring forties, the sight of Amsterdam Island meant they were on course. It was a confirmation of their navigation in a world without GPS, a solid fact in a universe of water. But the lure of these islands was matched only by their peril. Their very nature as specks of land in an immense ocean made them navigational hazards, especially in an era of imprecise charts and dead reckoning. A miscalculation of longitude, a sudden bank of fog, or a storm that blew a ship off course could turn a hoped-for refuge into a wooden splintering nightmare. Countless ships met their end on the uncharted cliffs of these very islands they sought. The waters around St. Helena, Tristan, and Amsterdam are littered with the ghostly remains of shipwrecks, silent testaments to the fine line between salvation and disaster. An island that was a lifeline in clear weather could become a siren's call in a storm, drawing ships onto its rocks with the promise of land. The advent of steam power, the opening of the Suez and Panama canals, and the rise of air travel fundamentally altered this ancient relationship. The great clipper ship routes faded into history, and with them, the critical importance of these oceanic waypoints. St. Helena's economy, once thriving from the provisioning trade, entered a long decline. The sealers and whalers left Amsterdam Island, and it reverted to a state of near wilderness, its human presence now limited to a small French research station, much like its neighbor Kerguelen. Yet something of their old role remains, transformed for a new age. St. Helena, while now accessible by a monthly air service, still feels like a place out of time, its history etched into every building in its capital, Jamestown. It is a living museum of the age of sail. Amsterdam Island serves as a sentinel for climate science, its isolation making it a perfect place to monitor the health of the planet's atmosphere far from any industrial contamination. These lighthouse islands stand as monuments to a bygone era of exploration and commerce. They remind us that isolation is not a fixed state, but a relative one, defined by the technology of the day. What was once a vital crossroads of global trade is now a destination for historians and adventurers. Their story is a poignant one of rise and fall, of being at the center of the world's attention and then fading into obscurity. But their legacy endures in the charts, in the stories of shipwrecks and rescues, and in the quiet, enduring presence they maintain in the great empty spaces of the sea. No longer lighthouses for ships, but for our collective memory. We have journeyed to the far corners of the map, tracing the contours of isolation through rock, ice, and history. We have listened to the roar of seabird colonies and the howl of sub-Antarctic gales. But now, let us turn our attention to a different phenomenon, one that is perhaps the purest expression of remoteness. Let us contemplate not a sound, but the absence of one. Let us consider the nature of true silence. In our modern world, silence is a relative term. It is the pause between songs on a playlist, the quiet of a house after the children have gone to sleep, the hush of a library. But these are not true silences. They are merely the masking of obvious noise by a backdrop of softer, more subtle ones. The hum of a refrigerator, the distant growl of traffic, the faint electronic whine of a device on standby. Our auditory landscape is a tapestry woven with the threads of human industry, and we have become so accustomed to its texture that we have forgotten what the loom sounds like when it stops. To find true silence, one must travel to a place like the interior of Kerguelen, or a windless cove on an uninhabited coral sea key, or the heart of a high Arctic glacier. It is here that you first encounter a profound and unsettling discovery. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of something else entirely. At first, in such a place, you might believe you have gone deaf. The relentless internal monologue of the mind, so often drowned out by external stimulus, suddenly has no competition. It can feel loud, even frantic in the void. But if you stay, if you breathe and wait, a shift occurs. You begin to hear the world as it is, not as you have built it. This is when true silence reveals its layers. It begins with the sound of your own body, the rush of blood in your ears, the steady rhythm of your heartbeat, the intake and exhalation of your own breath. These are the most ancient and intimate of sounds, the percussion section of your own existence, usually masked by the world's noise. Then, as you settle, the external world begins to whisper its own, more subtle language. You hear the soft, almost imperceptible sigh of a breeze moving over rock. You hear the delicate crunch of a single lichen under your boot. You hear the faint, high-pressure hiss of falling snow. On a beach, you might hear the gentle, fizzing retreat of a single wave over sand, each grain clicking against its neighbor, a sound normally lost in the crash of the surf. In a forest, you hear not just a bird, but the rustle of a single leaf as it gives way and begins its slow, spiraling descent to the forest floor. This is the sound of the earth, breathing. It is a tapestry of minute, natural sounds, each one clear and distinct, unmudded by the low-frequency drone of humanity. It is not empty, it is exquisitely, intricately full. In this space, your hearing becomes more acute, but so does your other senses. The scent of the air, clean, cold, and sharp, becomes a story in itself. The quality of the light on a rock face feels like a physical touch. This profound silence can be unsettling. For a mind conditioned by constant input, the lack of it can feel like a deprivation. It forces a confrontation with the self, stripping away the distractions we use to buffer our own thoughts. There is nowhere to hide from your own mind in such a place. This is why the first moments of true isolation can be accompanied by a spike of anxiety, a primal fear of being utterly alone. But if you can lean into it, if you can accept the initial discomfort, the silence ceases to be empty and becomes a vessel. It becomes a space for a different kind of thought, slower, deeper, less linear. The mind, freed from the task of processing a constant stream of alerts and information, begins to wander, to make connections it otherwise wouldn't. It is in this space that creativity often stirs, that problems are seen from new angles, and a deep, wordless sense of connection to the natural world can take root. The silence of these remote places is not a void. It is a sanctuary. It is the auditory signature of a world untouched by human haste and noise. It is a reminder that for almost all of Earth's history, this was the planet's only sound. The wind, the water, the slow growth of a tree, the fall of a stone. Our noisy world is the aberration, a brief and recent clamor in the long, quiet history of the planet. To experience this true silence is to understand that it is not a lack but a presence. It is a gift. It is the sound of time itself, patient and immense. It is the sound of the world before us, and the sound it will one day return to, long after our own noise has faded away. In the deepest silence of the most isolated places on Earth, we are not met with nothing. We are met with everything. The profound silence and stark beauty of the world's most isolated islands are not merely aesthetic qualities. They are the visible manifestations of a deep and delicate ecological truth. These remote specks of land are not just geographical accidents, they are arcs. For millions of years, they have sailed on the ocean of time, carrying within them the results of unique and uninterrupted evolutionary experiments. They are living museums, archives of life's ingenuity and their greatest strength. Their isolation is also their most profound vulnerability. An island ecosystem is a world in miniature, a closed system that has developed its own rules. When a bird, insect, or plant's ancestor arrived on these shores, by wind, by wing, or on a raft of vegetation, it found a land of opportunity, but also one of limited competition and predation. Over millennia, these colonists evolved in splendid isolation, adapting to fill ecological niches that, on a continent, would be occupied by dozens of different species. They lost defenses they no longer needed. A flightless bird on a continent is soon extinct. A flightless bird on an island with no predators is an energy-saving success story. Plants, freed from the browsing of large herbivores, might lose their thorns or bitter toxins. The result is a community of species found nowhere else on Earth, endemics, each a unique thread in a web of life that has been woven slowly, patiently, and with exquisite precision. This specialized, finely tuned balance is a masterpiece of evolution, but it is a masterpiece painted on glass. The very traits that allowed these species to thrive in their isolated paradise, naivety towards predators, a lack of competitive aggression, specialized diets, make them catastrophically vulnerable to change. And the most devastating change is the arrival of species from the outside world, a world where life has been forged in the relentless fires of competition and predation. The history of remote islands is littered with ecological tragedies triggered by a single, careless introduction. The story of the dodo on Mauritius is the classic parable. A flightless, fearless bird hunted to extinction by sailors and outcompeted by introduced pigs and monkeys. But the tragedy is not a relic of the past. It is ongoing. Imagine a single pregnant mouse escaping from a research vessel onto a previously rodent-free island like Kerguelen or a seabird sanctuary in the Coral Sea. That single mouse can found a dynasty. With no native predators, the population explodes. The mice, needing protein, turn to what is abundant and defenseless: seabird chicks. On Go Island in the South Atlantic, introduced house mice have learned to eat the living flesh of albatross chicks, which sit motionless, utterly unequipped by evolution to understand or resist this new threat. A single, tiny mammal can bring a colony of the world's most majestic flying birds to the brink of collapse. Or consider a plant, like the guava or blackberry, introduced to a place like Pitcairn or Rapa Nui as a food source. Released from the insects and diseases that kept it in check at home, it can become an invasive blanket, smothering the native flora that unique insects and birds depend upon. A rat, a cat, a goat, a common ant, each can be an ecological sledgehammer, shattering relationships that took millennia to build. The pathways for these invasions are almost always human. We are the connectors of these isolated worlds. Our ships carry stowaway insects and rodents in their holds and cargo. Our boots carry the seeds of invasive plants in the mud on their soles. Our settlements introduce domestic animals that then run wild. In seeking to recreate a piece of home, or through simple carelessness, we become the agents of a homogenization that erases the unique and replaces it with the common. The loss is not merely a matter of biodiversity statistics. When a unique island species vanishes, a chapter of life's story is erased forever. It is a loss of genetic information, of evolutionary potential, of a form that existed nowhere else and will never exist again. The haunting silence that falls over an island after its last endemic bird has been eaten by a rat is a different kind of silence from the peaceful one we contemplated earlier. It is the silence of extinction, a final and absolute emptiness. Yet, there is a growing global awareness of this fragility and a determined effort to fight back. Conservationists are now undertaking heroic efforts to restore these arcs. The most powerful tool is the creation of predator-free islands. Teams of dedicated specialists mount military-style campaigns to eradicate every single invasive rat, mouse, or cat from an island. It is painstaking, expensive work, but it has proven successful. Once the invaders are gone, the resilience of nature is often breathtaking. Native plants rebound, insect populations recover, and seabirds, their ancestral memory still strong, return to nest on safe ground once more. These islands, in their fragility, hold up a mirror to our own planet. Earth itself is an island, adrift in the cosmic ocean. Its systems are complex, balanced, and interconnected. The lesson of the isolated ecosystem is a universal one, a system that evolves in a state of balance, free from certain external pressures, can be incredibly productive and diverse, but also uniquely vulnerable to sudden, novel shocks. The isolated islands teach us about the preciousness of uniqueness, the interconnectedness of life, and the profound responsibility that comes with connection. They are canaries in the coal mine of our global ecosystem, reminding us that the threads of life are delicate, and that once cut, they cannot be rewoven. For nearly 20 chapters, we have explored isolation as a physical fact, a measure of distance, of treacherous seas, of the sheer logistical impossibility of reaching a place. We have stood on shores where the nearest human being was weeks of voyage away. But as we near the end of our journey, a quiet, modern question arises, one that hums in the background of our connected age. In a world crisscrossed by satellites, illuminated by the constant glow of the internet, and mapped down to the last meter, can anywhere on the surface of this planet truly be considered isolated anymore? The answer is both yes and no, for the nature of isolation itself has been fundamentally transformed. The geographical isolation, the one of wind and wave, remains as potent as ever. The voyage to Tristan da Cunha is still a week-long battle with the South Atlantic swells. Landing on Bouvet Island is still a feat of endurance and luck. The physical barriers of ocean, ice, and rock have not shrunk. A satellite signal cannot calm a storm or flatten a wave. If you are injured on Pitcairn, the doctor is still hours, if not days, away. In this tangible, physical sense, the world's remote islands are as isolated as they have ever been. Yet, a new dimension has been added, the dimension of information. For the first time in human history, a person on the most remote island on Earth can be, paradoxically, at the center of the world. A researcher in a hut on Kerguelen can video call their family in Paris in real time. A resident of Tristan da Cunha can scroll through the same social media feeds, watch the same viral videos, and follow the same global news cycles as someone in Tokyo or New York. The psychological chasm has been bridged. The feeling of being completely cut off, of living in a world with a different rhythm and different news, is vanishing. The unique, inward-focused culture of an island like Pitcairn now exists in a constant, low-level dialogue with the global monoculture. This connection is a double-edged sword. For the islander, it can alleviate the crushing weight of loneliness, provide access to education and telemedicine, and offer a window to a world they may never physically visit. But it can also be a corrosive force. It can make the limitations of island life feel more acute, fueling the exodus of young people who see a world of opportunity they cannot access. It can introduce the anxieties and frenetic pace of modern life into cultures built on slowness and community. The very uniqueness of these places, forged by their separation, is now under pressure from the constant streaming influence of the outside. Furthermore, our ability to observe these places has annihilated their mystery. There are no more blank spots on the map. Every atoll in the Coral Sea, every glacier on Bouvet Island has been photographed, scanned, and digitized. We can zoom in from space and count the penguins on a beach. This is a boon for science and conservation, but it has forever changed the romance of the unknown. The age of exploration, of setting sail for a truly uncharted land is over. Our journeys now are not into the unknown, but into the documented. This leads us to a new, more nuanced definition of isolation. True isolation in the 21st century is no longer just about being far away. It is about being disconnected by choice. It is the conscious decision to turn off the screen, to silence the ping of the notification, to value the physical reality around you over the digital reality beamed from space. The most isolated person in the world today may not be a researcher in the Antarctic, but someone in a bustling city who has never known a moment free from digital demand. For the islands themselves, their isolation is now a curated experience. You can be off the grid while knowing that the grid is right there in your pocket, waiting for a weak signal to reach a passing satellite. The profound, unsettling, and liberating feeling of being truly out of touch, where no one knows where you are and no one can reach you, is becoming one of the world's rarest and most valuable commodities. So, are these islands still isolated? Physically, yes. Their geography is immutable, but their psychological isolation is fading. They are now lonely outposts in a connected empire, their solitude punctuated by the digital heartbeat of humanity. The satellites in our sky have not brought these islands closer to us. Rather, they have brought us closer to them, imposing our presence upon their silence even in our physical absence. The final frontier of isolation, then, may no longer be a place on a map. It is a state of mind. It is the silence between the signals, the conscious unplugging from the global network, the choice to listen only to the wind and the waves. The islands still offer this, but now one must make an effort to find it. One must look up from the screen and out past the horizon to where the physical world remains as it always has been, vast, quiet, and profoundly separate. Our journey across the world's most isolated islands is drawing to a close. We have stood on the black sands of volcanic shores, felt the phantom chill of calving glaciers, and listened to the cacophony of life in seabird cities. We have traced the paths of ancient navigators and mutineers, and felt the weight of both historical and self-imposed solitude. From the community-forged hearth of Tristan da Cunha to the absolute, abiotic grandeur of Bouvet Island, we have explored the many faces of remoteness. And as we return from these distant shores, we are left not just with a collection of facts, but with a deeper, more resonant understanding. These islands are more than dots on a map. They are the quiet guardians of the blue wilderness, and they hold a mirror to the soul of our planet and to our own. In an age of exponential connection, where every thought can be broadcast and every field can be seen from space, these islands stand as the last bastions of something priceless, true wilderness. They are the keepers of silence in a world saturated with noise. They are the preservers of mystery in an era of relentless disclosure. A satellite can map the contour of a coast, but it cannot convey the feeling of the wind that sculpts it, or the profound solitude that settles upon it when the sun dips below an empty horizon. These places remind us that not everything needs to be known, cataloged, and shared. Some things are meant to simply be. They are the guardians of biological purity, the living arcs whose fragile cargo of endemic life represents a unique and irreplaceable thread in the tapestry of evolution. The flightless bird, the peculiar insect, the hardy plant that exists nowhere else, these are not merely curiosities. They are masterpieces of adaptation, honed by time and isolation. They are a testament to life's relentless, creative force and a stark warning of its fragility. In protecting these islands, we are not just saving species, we are saving entire worlds, unique narratives of existence that, once lost, can never be rewritten. For the human spirit, these islands serve as both a refuge and a reckoning. They are a refuge from the frantic pace and the endless choices of modern life. They offer a simpler, starker reality where community is your lifeline, where self-reliance is not a philosophy but a practice, and where the rhythm of your day is set by the sun and the tides, not by the ping of a notification. Yet, they are also a reckoning. They ask us difficult questions about our need for connection versus our capacity for solitude. They force us to confront what we are willing to sacrifice for comfort and what we might gain from embracing limitation. The story of Pitcairn is a story of this eternal human tension, the clash between the desire for freedom and the need for order, played out on the world's smallest stage. The meaning of their isolation is evolving. It is no longer just a measure of nautical miles, but a measure of a choice. It is the choice to value the physical over the digital, the slow over the fast, the unique over the universal. As our global culture flattens differences in a wave of homogenization, these islands stand as defiant monuments to the particular, the local, and the singular. They are the antidote to the sameness that connectivity can bring. Their very existence, scattered like a handful of dust across the immense blue canvas of the ocean, is a lesson in perspective. They remind us of the sheer scale of our planet, a scale that our digital maps and instant flights have dangerously diminished. They teach us humility. To stand on a shore and look out at an unbroken circle of sea and sky is to understand our true place, not as masters of the earth, but as temporary guests in a system of majestic and ancient power. So, as we take our leave from these quiet guardians, let us carry their lessons with us. We do not all need to live on a remote island, but we can all seek to preserve a corner of that isolation in our own lives. We can seek out silence. We can value the wild places, both within and around us. We can remember that a life, like an ecosystem, can be rich not by the number of connections it makes, but by the depth and resilience of the ones it maintains. The lonely islands will endure. The waves will continue to break on their shores, the winds will howl across their peaks, and the stars will wheel unchallenged in their night skies. They are the quiet guardians, the eternal sentinels. They hold the line against the encroaching noise, not for us, but for the planet itself. They are a promise that no matter how connected we become, there will always be places where the world is still wild, still quiet, and still wondrously, profoundly alone. And in that enduring solitude lies a hope that the wild heart of the earth will continue to beat, long after our own stories are told.